Welcome back to the Max Term Podcast. This is James Finch. I'm solo today. No Kyle. He's at the NHL draft. I'm recording this the morning of the first round, so June 28th. Going to go over pretty much just all the different things that have happened this week, everything that's led up to the start of the draft, at least that's happened so far. And kind of just dive into some of the numbers that we might have behind it as far as our contract projections, kind of the thoughts of what occurred. So I guess to dive right in to this snapshot episode, Dylan DeMello re-signs with the Winnipeg Jets, 4 years, 4.9 million. Now our projection was 4 years, 5.3 million. So this was a little bit off, not a huge miss, but the difference there, the air is a little more than we would usually like. We're usually looking for, I mean, really, we want no air, but when all is said and done at the end of each off season, we're really shooting for 350,000 somewhere in there. So this one was closer to 450. So he signs a little bit under what we thought he could get on the UFA market. Now, obviously, we don't know why. Maybe he likes Winnipeg, wants to stay there. Big thing here is we believe Winnipeg got solid value here for someone who's ultimately a top four defenseman, if not a top pair defenseman, based on his usage. So he's playing well over 21 minutes a night last season. Not really an offensive guy, but can put up some points. It is really that strong defensive player. So great value for Winnipeg. Not terrible for the player, but we really thought on the UFA market he could do a little bit better than that. Moving on to Casey Middlestat. So he re-signed with the Colorado Avalanche. Was having a really good season with Buffalo. Ends up getting traded to pretty much be Colorado's new 2C and did well for them. Had a pretty solid playoff run. He ends up signing for 3 years, 5.75. Now, he was an RFA, and 3 years would buy a UFA year. That's important because that buys a UFA year, we're going to compare the 3 years to our long-term projection for him, which was a 5-year deal at about $6 million. Just a touch over $6 million. So a couple things. Maybe the team is a little unsure about the long-term future of Middlestat. Maybe they just needed to keep the cap hit lower for now to make all their other moves work. They don't have a huge amount of cap space to work with. I'm a little concerned for the team because if he continues to be that legitimate 2C, in 3 years when this contract is over, he's going to absolutely cash in as a top six center who is at that point 28 years old as a UFA. That's an ideal situation for Middlestat, which kind of brings us to the other side of it's very possible Middlestat and his camp may have wanted to keep the length lower to be able to play this top six center 2C role more consistently with Colorado and then be able to cash in a few years as, again, a 28-year-old UFA top six center. So looking short term, this may have helped the team save a little bit of money. Looking long term, it's not going to help them save money. They would potentially need to pay up big time for a top six center in 3 years. Just a couple comps to throw out. Well, I guess I'll list the 5 we have on our graphic for Middlestat. Anthony Cirelli, William Karlsson, JT Miller, Yanni Gord, and Marcus Johansson. All solid players. Obviously, kind of a range of talent there, going from Cirelli to Johansson. But I think it kind of helps paint the picture of he is capable of being a 2C. He's a very good 3C. And I guess we'll see what happens in the next 3 years of whether or not he can continue playing well and ultimately cash in on a bigger contract. Moving on from Middlestat, we're kind of going into the Vancouver Canucks world here with 3 signings, kind of all happening in a short amount of time. Vancouver got a lot of their depth work done here. So Teddy Bluger, he came in first as far as the contracts are concerned. 2 years, 1.8 million. We had 2 years by about 2.18 million. So we were off about 375,000 here. Came out earlier in the offseason when the Canucks were out of the playoffs that Bluger preferred to stay in Vancouver, but wasn't really sure whether or not that was going to be able to work because Vancouver has a lot of pending free agents. So they end up making it work. He comes in a little less than our projected value for going to UFA. Maybe he gave them a slight discount, unsure. Big thing with Bluger is he's an okay 3C. He's a very good 4C. So where do you slot Teddy Bluger and his 2-year 1.8 AAV into the lineup? Well, he's a great defensive bottom 6 center. So if that's your third line, maybe it's Bluger, Joshua, and Suter. That's a really solid defensive line. Maybe you shoot for your defensive line being your fourth line, which in that case, Bluger would be a very, very good 4C to have, both contract-wise, performance-wise. That is an ideal, very good fit. Not to say he can't be the 3C. He can. You might not get quite as much offense out of him as you would like from your 3C. Moving on from Bluger, Dakota Joshua ends up signing. This was one that was very up in the air, whether he would go to market, which some people thought he could push maybe a 4x4 on the UFA market. Our projection was 4 years, 3.26. He ends up coming in 4 years, 3.25. Now, again, for anyone that's new to our podcast, new to our content, we put out our contract projections, the raw number that we get to. So really our projection was $3,264,123.07. No one's signing for something that specific. So we know that in general, our projection was 4 years, 3.25. Now, we listed in there exactly how it came out, and we put his actual in there exactly how it came in. So there is an error of a little bit over 14,000. But in general, we feel we pretty much nailed this one. Big thing with Dakota Joshua. 18 goals last season. He shot over 20%. So there could be a little regression there. So fans who think he might be able to be a 20 goal guy, 25 goal guy, maybe he continues to improve. It's also very possible he's more of a 15 goal guy, which again, that's fine for your third line, especially with everything else Dakota Joshua brings as far as play style. Perfect kind of player for the playoffs. I think he was very popular throughout the playoffs. So again, for a third line guy, 4 years, 3.25 isn't bad. The only concern someone might have is because of that heavier play style, 4 years might be I guess in the fourth year you might be looking at a player who you can kind of tell that heavier play style is taking a toll on him. But again, he is just 28, so it's very possible this contract is just fine. I think people looked at our comps and were a little worried because they saw Justin Abdelkader on there, and that deal did not age well. But that was also a 7-year contract. You've got other players in our comps like Brandon Tanev, Joel Armia, Marcus Foligno, Jordan Martinook. These are all solid bottom 6 players. Can all play on a third line and be pretty good. All bring a little bit of a heavier call it a playoff style intensity. And as long as you keep getting that from Joshua, you're getting exactly what you're paying for. So that's a good deal. Tyler Myers was the third Vancouver Canuck contract to come in. So that deal is interesting. So we had a 2-year, $3.17 million AAV projection for Myers, and he ends up coming in. AAV is about right at $3 million, so he came in just under. The possible issue here is the length was 3 years instead of 2. Now he's 34 years old. He's a defenseman who ideally he's transitions into a more clear bottom pair role instead of that kind of in between second pair, third pair kind of player. You really want to see the minutes, the time on ice minutes, to be a little bit lighter, quality of the opponent to be not as tough. Myers hasn't been the greatest defensive defenseman. He was fine last year, but still not very good. His offense was a little better than recent years. I really think if this was a 2-year by 3.2, this is fine. The third year is a little concerning again because of his age, and the decline is pretty much starting. He really wanted to stay in Vancouver, so that kind of makes me wonder about the third year of kind of why they had to give that to him. So I don't know. We'll see. Not the greatest deal, not the worst deal. It's probably one that ends up being fine. But I do wonder just if the length of the contract was a little much there. So switching from contract signings to trades, just to kind of go over. This one happened actually a little while ago, but it was after we had last recorded, so I don't believe we touched on it. New Jersey Devils, Calgary Flames, Jacob Markstrom. So Flames sent Markstrom with $1.875 million retained to the Devils. So the Devils get Markstrom on a 2-year deal at $4.125 million a year, which is real solid for what Markstrom provides as a clear starting goaltender. New Jersey had to send Kevin Ball, defenseman, a much bigger defenseman, solid player, probably a good bottom pair guy, maybe can grow into a second pair. Isn't quite as physical as a Nikita Zadorov, but that might be the kind of fit that Calgary is looking for. And then Calgary also gets a 2025 first round pick from New Jersey, which had top 10 protection on it. Not bad to get a quality defenseman, a young defenseman, and then a first round pick for Markstrom, who is an older goalie, has 2 years left. It's not a super flashy deal by any means for Calgary, but that's fine. Then another goalie deal that happened much more recently was between the Bruins and the Senators. So that was the Linus Ullmark trade. So Ullmark goes to Ottawa, and Boston ends up getting Joonas Korpisalo. So Ottawa retained $1 million on that contract. So I believe that means that's a $3 million cap hit for Korpisalo. They also get Martin Kastelik, who's kind of a good energy fourth line guy. Okay defensive metrics. So he could actually become a solid fourth liner for the Bruins. And then Boston also got their 2024 first round pick back. So that's pick number 25 in tonight's draft. So recording the early morning of the draft. Boston gets pick 25 back. Not the haul that I think Bruins fans were hoping for. Very tough So goalie trades are tough because a lot of times they don't end up getting back what you would hope. Linus Olmark has 1 year left. This trade happened with no extension agreement between Olmark and Ottawa, which could also potentially hurt the price or the return that Boston gets. So it again, it's fine. You get your first round pick, you get a solid depth guy in Kastelik, but overall, I think a lot of Bruins fans feel it's a little underwhelming, which I guess for a guy who has been playing Vezina caliber hockey, yeah, you wish you could get a little more, but it is what it is. Um, I guess the only other thought there is would Boston fans would they have rather the Bruins keep Olmark and just have him and Swayman for one more year and Olmark would walk to UFA afterwards? Would the value of having Olmark this next season be better than Korpisalo, Kastelik, and the 24 first? I don't know. I don't know if that ends up being the case or not. Well, time will tell, though. Real important plug here. We released contract extensions this week. So we do have one for Linus Olmark, contract extension projections. There have been a lot of rumors, 5 years at $7 million for Olmark. That's been thrown around publicly. Our projection was 6 years at about 7.1. And that's really what I wonder about when it comes to contract extensions, um, especially for players who are on, I guess we'll call it the wrong side of 30. A lot of times the length ends up being an issue is they would like a little bit longer of a deal and some teams might not be willing to go there. So we'll see how it all plays out. Maybe there is no extension and Olmark just plays the season out and goes to UFA. Again, that's another thing. Time will tell. Moving into some other trades. So Detroit had traded a prospect defenseman, Andrew Gibson, to Nashville for Tampa Bay's second round pick. That's the 53rd pick in this year's draft. And then Detroit pretty much turned right around and attached that pick to Jake Wallman and sent him to the San Jose Sharks for future considerations. Now, I think this was one that really puzzled a lot of people right away. So not this past season, but the season before, Jake Wallman looked very, very good. Like very good. They end up signing him, I believe it was 3 years, 3.4 million. And then this past season, not nearly as good. Played a lot of tougher minutes on a top pair, pretty much with Sider. So maybe when it's all said and done, Wallman is really meant to be that second pair or even a very elite third pair defenseman. But this is just a really weird trade. I think a lot of teams would have been willing to offer an actual return for Jake Wallman. It's just an odd asset management from Detroit. So I don't love that trade from Detroit's perspective. From San Jose, it's kind of a no-brainer. You bring in an NHL defenseman who is ultimately a good player. Whether you have him in the right role or not, we'll see. But for a team that is a really bad team, you bring in a quality defenseman like that who can play up and down the lineup and also get a second round pick. That's great. Just to kind of stick with San Jose, so they brought in that Tampa Bay second, which was the 53rd pick. Maybe help them feel a little bit more comfortable making a trade just centered around draft picks with the Buffalo Sabres. So San Jose had Pittsburgh's first round pick. That was the 14th pick in the draft. And they attached New Jersey's second round pick, which was the 42nd pick in the draft, or is, I should say. The draft hasn't happened yet. So they attached 14 and 42 together to trade up in the first round to Buffalo's 11th pick. So to me, that kind of shows San Jose probably has a list of players that they like in the first round. And they just moved up to make sure that they have that next pick within that list of players. Now, Buffalo, a lot of rumors about Buffalo being willing to trade their first round pick. And moving back from 11 to get 14 and 42, if you look at a lot of the traditional draft pick value tools that are out there, Puckpedia has one that's real solid. That shows positive value in the trade for Buffalo. So I think the way Buffalo looks at it is they have more assets to potentially make some trades and better their NHL roster. So pretty solid, I guess, for both teams there. Jumping back in time a little bit, a trade between Vancouver and Chicago. So this is a trade that I think really allowed Vancouver to make a lot of those signings that I went over earlier in this episode. They were able to move Ilya Mikheyev. They retained $712,500, which is 15% of his contract. So Colorado gets the cap hit of $4,037,500. So Colorado gets Mikheyev. They also get the UFA rights to Sam Lafferty. We'll see if they can get a deal done there. And they also get a 2027 second round pick from Vancouver. Vancouver gets Chicago's 2027 fourth round pick. So pretty much a cap dump for Vancouver. It looks like Chicago wanted the ability to talk with Lafferty. So just to plug that contract extension here, or not extension, but his UFA projection that we have him at 2 years at about 2.4 million. Pretty much a fourth liner, but kind of a decent, solid one, decent energy guy. Some comps: Riley Nash, Sean Corrali, Eric Fair, Thomas Nosek, Derek Grant. So guys that are very much fourth liners, but are kind of considered solid fourth liners. Which, if Chicago can get done, great. If they can't, it's not a big deal. I don't think it makes this deal not worth it for them. Big thing they're looking at is, will Mikheyev bounce back and provide some real good value and maybe even turn into a trade chip down the line. Last trade that I think I want to go over here is between Calgary and the Washington Capitals. So Calgary ends up getting Colorado's second round pick in 2025 and sending off Andrew Mangiapane to the Capitals. Now, he's a player who a few seasons ago had a breakout season, 30-plus goals. Defensive metrics looked great. And then the following season, defensive metrics were average. Offensive metrics were still there, but the point totals weren't. Looking at this past season, same exact thing. Offensive metrics were there. The totals weren't quite there. Defensive metrics looked pretty much average. So I think a big question here is, do you think Mangiapane can get back to what he was in that breakout season? Possibly. Our contract projection for him, or extension projection, I should say, because he's got 1 year left, was 6x6. So chances are, if you want to extend him, if you're the Capitals and you want to try and make an extension happen, you're going to have to pay him like he is a top six winger, second line winger, to really get the deal done. If you're a little worried based on the past couple of years that he's more of a third line winger, I don't think he would accept a contract extension that pays like a third line winger. He's going to want to bet on himself and play out this season. Now, going back to the trade itself, so Calgary got a 2025 second, and I saw a lot of reactions on X pretty much saying, well, is that it? And I think a big thing to point out, just a similar trade, Tyler Toffoli went from Calgary to New Jersey last offseason for Sharon Govich and a third, which was probably the value of a late second, early third, and then a third round pick at that time. Tyler Toffoli had elite metrics offensively and defensively prior to this season with Calgary, and he had 34 goals, 39 assists, and 73 points. So that's very much comparable to what Mangiapane did in his breakout season a few years ago, but it's also much better than what Mangiapane has been the past couple of years. So looking at it that way, acquiring a winger with 1 year left on his contract, it makes a little bit of sense that the cost would be a little bit less than what Calgary was able to get for Toffoli. And now just to touch on some rumors, kind of to wrap up the end here. Joseph Woll is rumored to be getting a contract extension on July 1st. It's out there roughly 3 years, 3.75. We put a tweet out or an X post, I don't even know what to call it, pretty much saying that's a bit of a surprise. Our extension projections 3 years at 2.2 million. And the reason why is ultimately the pretty much the NHL experience. So his NHL experience is very much in line with what Aiden Hill had when he signed his 2-year deal with San Jose, what Connor Ingram had after, not this last season, but the season before when he signed his 3-year deal with Arizona. Really just kind of here and there games for a couple of years, and then one season in the 20 to 25 game range. That's what those players had. That's what Joseph Woll had. Similar performance as far as like a save percentage. So 3 years by 3.75, that we're not saying he can't live up to that by any means. He's a pretty solid goaltending prospect. I guess he's a little older, but he's a very solid goaltender, needs to stay healthy. But the big thing is that 3 by 3.75 that was reported, that just really isn't in line with past contracts. And again, we calculate our contracts based off of the cap hit percentage. So it's adjusted for the salary cap changing. Interesting deal for Toronto. Interesting deal. Another goalie deal that's supposedly going to come down is Jussi Saros, 8 years, 7.74. This is a really interesting one. We had his contract projection at 7 by 8.25. So that extra year, maybe he needs to bump the AAV down a little bit because that's buying well into his late 30s. And then maybe he even gave them a little discount on top of that. We'll see if there's any trade protection when it gets announced. My guess is there probably is some. Interesting move to make. Having Askarov there as well. We'll see if he sticks around or if he's used in a trade. And then the last thing to mention, Aaron Ekblad popped up in trade rumors, which is interesting. Wonder if it is kind of a effort to make Montour fit. We'll see. But supposedly Ekblad's being discussed in trades. Again, that could be completely false, but that's what's out there publicly. We have an extension for him, 7 years, 7.4. So yeah, I guess we'll see. Another quick thing to throw in there, Alex Morello gone from Arizona. So if Arizona comes back, it's going to be a while. A new owner would have to find an arena and get that solidified, and they'd probably be an expansion team. So with that, I'm going to wrap up this episode, the snapshot episode of just kind of going over the week leading up to the draft. Draft is tonight. And yeah, everyone enjoy it. Hopefully your team drafts a good player. We'll talk to you next time.